Hello everyone, I'm Ben Semrick and welcome to the follow-up question where I break down what happens at Allentown City Council meetings and we ask the important questions to the ones making the decisions. This week's meeting took place on June 1st and went a lot longer than expected. Afterwards, I sat down and talked with Council Member Josh Siegel about some of the controversial items that came out of the meeting and some things we'll be hearing about a lot in the near future. But first, this is what you missed. A few contracts were approved, the first to Environmental Waste Minimization Incorporated, aka Rapid Response, for emergency chemical cleanup and hauling and removing chemicals from city-owned properties. Then there was an emergency one-year fleet mechanics contract voted on, and the city fleet mechanics are unionized and were negotiating a collective bargaining agreement with the previous contract holder, Centera. Now, at one point in May of 2021, those workers went on strike, and we'll talk about that vote and what it means for the workers later with Council Member Josh Siegel. There were also some bills passed, including Bill 32, which would give $15,000 of grant money from the general fund for the Allentown Fire Department to buy high-quality thermal imaging cameras and accessories. Another one was Bill 36, which would eliminate having to get moving permits or any no parking signs if you plan on moving in or out of the city of Allentown. Now, council went forward with hiring 3 new police officers. The resolution passed 5-2 with Councilmembers Cece Gerlach and Natalie Santos being the lone no votes. Now, after Wednesday meeting, I spoke with Council Member Josh Siegel about the city fleet mechanics and if their union workers are going to be recognized. We also talked about the IronPigs minor league baseball team asking for $1.5 million from the city. Take a look. Again, thank you, Josh. I appreciate your time. Tonight was a bit of a long one. One big thing that was on the agenda and that was talked about for a while was the fleet maintenance contract and emergency contract with King George Fleet Services. Now, that was voted on and passed, but it seemed the big conversation was regarding if they're going to be following the past and expired central bargaining agreement with the unionized employees, which is really kind of how we got to this place through strikes and the previous contract. Talk to me a little bit about that and where are we now?
So initially the bill was for a 2-year contract with King George Fleet Services. Myself and several other members on council who are supportive of basically insourcing the garage maintenance. So we've outsourced it really for over 2 decades now. Bill Haidt initially outsourced it, the Republican mayor from the late 90s. And since then, there's been nothing but problems, which I think is emblematic of the issues of privatization, especially municipal service. Basically, Constellus, then it was Centera. Basically, this alphabet soup of private companies that have run the garage have consistently undercut our workers. They've not paid them a fair wage. They've undercut them on benefits. And as a result, it's been very difficult to recruit qualified talent. Obviously, the labor market's really tight right now, and mechanics are a highly skilled profession. And so even in connection or in competition with our local municipal garages, Bethel and Easton, we woefully undercompensate our mechanics and our supervisors. So basically, yeah, that's what's gotten us here is the workers at the SEIU 32BJ workers have been horribly mistreated by the companies that have privately managed the garage. And so our goal is to make sure that, first off, that King George Fleet Services respects the right to unionize and respects SEIU's right to organize our workers first and foremost. And that obviously they give them a good contract, at least to start honoring the original one. We certainly don't want to start with a non-union shop. But obviously we want to make sure that they raise those wages so that we're competitive with private garages and other municipal garages in the area. And more importantly, this is just a holdover while we wait for the 14-week consultant to basically determine what it would cost and what it would look like to bring it back in-house, which is the real justification for why we don't want to, do a 2-year contract. We're really adamant about making sure we, transition to an in-sourced garage where we have total control.
For that second motion, the question of whether the word ask or required was a part of the conversation. Talk to me a little bit about what is the differences there and why we went with asked instead of required.
Like the issue with require was just whether or not we even had the legal capacity to compel King George to sort of recognize the collective bargaining agreement. It was the opinion of our solicitors that we couldn't make that, we could not make that ask. We couldn't say require. So instead we shift this language to ask. And that's why I was adamant about the administration just reminding King George that, if they prove to be a bad faith negotiator, or more importantly, don't recognize the validity of our union shop, that we as the city have the legal right to break that contract. So unfortunately, we don't have that ability to compel them. We can't legally require it. But we certainly have the leverage to remind them that, in the event that they don't prove to be good faith actors and they're bad negotiators and they're, vehemently anti-union, we can sever that contract.
What's the fear that urgency is going to be leveraged against the union?
I think the fear is that basically we need someone in the short term to manage the garage, because Centera has basically failed to fulfill their contractual obligations. Hence why we brought in King George Fleet Services. And I think the fear is perhaps that because they understand that there's that urgency and there's this paucity of management at the garage, that they might use that as a way to say, hey, we don't have to honor anything. But the reality is it's a large contract. It's about $2.6 million. So we probably have, I would say, more leverage than not over them in terms of getting them to honor their obligations. We're a large city, the third largest in the state. It's not every day, a giant fleet maintenance contract like that goes out. And again, previous firms that have had a worse track record have at least honored the CBA. So our goal is to make sure that we don't lose ground.
ARPA money was another big topic tonight. Last week we had a special meeting where residents were able to come up and tell council members what they thought the funds should be going towards. I believe then it was 57 million. I think we have 39 million roughly left that hasn't been allocated yet. Today there were two things on the agenda. A proposal for a special meeting to talk about $1.5 million going to the Vinci Center, as well as $1.5 million going towards the IronPigs. Those were separate bills. It seemed to have really caught a few council members off guard who thought that the city was going to be following a certain process that was not going to be seeing things like this pop up in the agenda. You seem to be pretty receptive to it and open to having things like this come up out of those special meetings. Talk to me about that, and where do you stand?
So we initially, as a city, we received $57 million from the federal government. We've spent approximately 14 million of that already under the previous administration, mostly on like capital projects. So some of it was stormwater and sewer maintenance. One of the more salient projects was the construction of a brand new fire training center. And part of what I was arguing tonight was the reason that we did those at the time was the urgency around inflation, labor costs, and raw materials consistently increasing. So, one of the reasons we moved so quickly on to the fire training facility was specifically the fact that every week and every successive month, the cost of building that facility was going up to the point where it was going to subsume a greater portion of our overall ARPA funding. And so now we have about $39 million left to allocate. And I respect the desire for a process. Like, there should be a series of public meetings, and there's no doubt that we need to hear from the community. But to a large extent, I'm sort of worried about maybe like the ad infinitum process of, at a certain point, it is incumbent on us as leaders and public officials to be decisive and definitive in what we believe should be, immediate public expenditures. And some on council have expressed reservations about like piecemeal kind of awarding of public funds. And all I believe is that even if we had a bunch of public hearings, the reality is there's no way we're going to award all $39 million at once. What's likely to happen is that nonprofits are going to come in, or organizations are going to come in, or individual projects are going to be put forward, and we're going to be individually allocating money, with weeks in between. We're not going to all at once spend 39 million. So as far as piecemeal goes, I think the most responsible thing to do is, get a general sense of what our priorities are. And in the case of Da Vinci and the IronPigs, which were the two projects that were on the table tonight, they're both shovel ready. So that's a specific distinction. These are both projects that are under construction or about to go under construction. Both of them are subject to the same inflationary pressures that the fire facility was. And so that opens us up to, I think, a particular like need to make these two investments now, um, mostly because one, they both have a huge benefit to like the city of Allentown in terms of job creation, economic development, and also just like supporting local residents. The Iron Pigs spend a tremendous amount of money on local vendors, which in turn employ local Allentonians. And it's a huge source of revenue and tourism for the city. And then Da Vinci is going to be groundbreaking and I think a truly game-changing investment for Center City Allentown because it's going to be a massive resource for Center City children, especially in schools that traditionally don't have access to the most advanced or like high-quality STEM programs. And it's also going to be a huge asset for the city in terms of furthermore bringing people downtown, anchoring a really great asset in the core of the city. You know, it's 700,000 visitors a year downtown. And I think about how transformative the Crayola Center has been for Easton. Like Liberty Science Center has been, around Newark and Jersey City. I mean, these are really worthwhile investments that have huge multiplier effects. And the longer we sit on them, the harder it becomes to be an active partner and the smaller that window of feasibility becomes. So for the Iron Pigs, basically we have until next April to make a decision. And really before that, because we can't have the costs continue to rise. And for the Iron Pigs, it's really do or die because these capital improvements are coming down from the Phillies. And if those improvements are not made, the Phillies will sever their contract with the Iron Pigs and the stadium really will become vacant because the Iron Pigs won't have basically a national benefactor anymore. They won't have a team that they're party to. So we would be losing a huge asset and a tremendous, you can.
Is that a real possibility? Are the Iron Pigs saying that there will be no more Iron Pigs if they don't get this $1.5 million from the city?
Basically, yeah. So it's not the Iron Pigs, it's the Phillies telling the Iron Pigs that basically, and this is happening all across Major League Baseball. Um, the Yankees did it to the Trenton AAA team. They basically major league teams that have AAA affiliates are coming down and saying, in order for you to be a AAA affiliate, we request that these certain amenities exist for our players because we want to have a high quality feeder team. So they're basically creating these unfunded mandates for minor league teams to meet. And they're saying if you don't make these investments and you don't make these specific improvements, we no longer find it our advantage to to deal with you directly. And so they'll shop around for other teams.
Council Member Candida Affa had mentioned it during the meeting today, and I've experienced the same thing. When you talk to somebody, local Joe Public here in Allentown or really anywhere in the Lehigh Valley, and you say $1.5 million of COVID relief money to the Iron Pigs, you get a lot of eye rolls and you get a lot of people scoffing at that, thinking, because they think of them as the Phillies. They think the Phillies need $1.5 million. That they're already getting $3.7 million for this project in tax dollars from the state, Lehigh, and Northampton County. Is this something that you feel that is worth it, playing ball with them? What happens next? If once we give them $1.5 million, isn't this going to kind of set a precedence going down the road that they can kind of keep coming to the till?
So I'm no fan of corporate subsidies. Teams do this regularly, bigger teams, right? This is not like the New York Jets or the Arizona Cardinals coming to Phoenix or New York and saying, if you don't take out a $1.4 million bond or you don't build us a brand new stadium, we're going to leave. This is not the sort of typical extortion that you see from, major teams. This isn't a Fortune 500 company saying we want X subsidy, otherwise, we're going to leave. Look, this is a, AAA affiliate. They're not super rich. Just because they're affiliated with the Phillies doesn't necessarily mean the Phillies are contributing. They're not contributing anything, right? This is a separate entity. And I certainly get the reservation, but I will say that in all the years that the Iron Pigs have been in Allentown, and they've been around since 2004, 2005, they've never asked the city for a dime. The county built the stadium. They took out a bond, they built the stadium, and the Iron Pigs are paying, and we leased the stadium to the Iron Pigs as a county, and the Iron Pigs pay off that lease. So the Iron Pigs have always met their end of the bargain. They've always been an active participant. They make all the bond. They pay the bond for the county. They're paying off the cost of the county. So they've been an equal partner. It's never like they've taken anything. They've never been a net negative. They've never taken anything that they've not returned. And, I would say, like, to the average person, it's not a $1.5 million handout to a team that's not involved in the community. They spend $4.6 million a year on local vendors. They employ 130 Allentonians. They spend, over almost $2 million a year on philanthropic contributions to local sports teams. So they are heavily invested in the community, which is a big commitment for a minor league team. And comparably speaking, they're very affordable. If you look at minor league ball teams, the IronPigs are at $10 a ticket. Some teams are upwards of $25, $30 for a ticket. So for a modest investment, we have an extraordinarily affordable team that families in the area can actually, reasonably afford to go see. This isn't like a $60 ticket to go see the Phillies or something, which might be out of reach for, a working class person in the city of Allentown. I'm not insensitive to that. And again, what I tried to make out tonight is it's not a zero-sum game. Look, this isn't like we only have 1.5 million and it's a choice between housing people and giving money to the IronPigs. That might change, in my opinion, the thought process or the decision-making calculus I'm using. But we have $39 million. And so it's not a zero-sum game. We can do both, right? We can invest in housing, invest in our youth, and also invest in these two really crucial economic development assets and cultural amenities that I think one has already been transformed through Allentown, and the other is going to continue to transform Allentown. And so that's the way I look at it, because it's not just 1.5 million, because the ROI is in the is in the numbers. For 1.5 million, we're getting $6-7 million back in terms of community investment. And I think that's a big win for Allentown, because if you lose the IronPigs, you're not just losing the team in the stadium, you're losing the money spent on local vendors, you're losing that philanthropic contribution to sports teams, local kids, local athletes, like minor to little leagues and stuff like that. So it's not like this is some corporate entity that could care less, or some billion-dollar sports team that wants a new stadium or is threatening to leave. This is really the Phillies saying, we will not honor, like, we'll be done with you, basically. And that I think that's a very different dynamic.
Now, both that and the Vinci Center were tabled, so I imagine we're going to be hearing a lot more about both of those projects. I imagine we're going to be hearing a lot more from Kurt Landis from the IronPigs on, like he did at the end of last week's special meeting, kind of stood up and said why they felt that they were, important members of the community and deserved that money. I imagine we're going to be seeing a lot more of that over the next few weeks. I know next week there's going to be another special meeting regarding that ARPA funding. Is that going to be similar to last week's meeting?
The future meetings are going to be a little bit more issue specific. So the next meeting is more focused on housing in particular, more specifically affordable housing and homelessness. And then, we'll have future meetings with other specific sort of priorities. We'll probably have a meeting on, youth and recreation. There might be another meeting on public safety. I still think those are to be determined. There's a lot of meetings moving forward. There isn't like a finite amount yet. The idea is to continue to have meetings that are like issue specific.
That's going to do it for this episode of the follow-up question. Now, remember, if you wanted to watch that meeting in its entirety or even live, you could do it on the city website. This week's was nearly 2 hours long, and remember, I sit through those so you do not have to. Thank you again, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next week when Council holds another special meeting regarding the nearly $40 million left in the city's American Rescue Plan money.